2025 in-person and online service. So welcome this morning, this day, and this opportunity to be together in community. We have a few announcements. We'll be having joys, concerns after time for all ages. At that point, we'll read the ones that have either come in on the chat online or are in the basket over there by Catherine that have been written down. Let's see. We have a couple other announcements. There's some sign-up sheets for dinners for 8 over there for April dinners for 8. Today is the last day to sign up for the care team dinner party. So there's a sign-up sheet for that over there on that table over there. So please sign up so the care team knows how much food to prepare. The soup supper is Friday, March 28th at 6. And there's also a book club. There's a little announcement over there for the discussing Coyote America, A Natural and Supernatural History by Dan Flores. That will next meet on April 17th at 7 p.m. Any other announcements? Okay. Then it is time for community greeting, where we greet each other. Okay. We will now move into the sacred part of this worship. As I ring the peace bowl 3 times, take deep breaths and relax so we can move into worship. For this moment in time, let go of your anxieties, fears, and worries. Be in this moment. now begin our service with our prelude. We will now read our church covenant. It is printed in the order of service, so feel free to read along with us. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We will now be lighting our chalice. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Blessed is the fire that burns in the heart's secret places. Blessed is the heart with the strength to stop its beating for honor's sake. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is from the Scivias, which is a 12th century work by Hildegard of Bingen. I'll be talking a lot more about that in my sermon. I, the fiery life of divine essence, am a flame beyond the beauty of the meadows. I gleam in the waters. I burn in the sun, moon, and the stars. With every breeze, as with invisible light that contains everything, I awaken everything to life. I am the breeze that nurtures all things green. I encourage blossoms to flourish with ripening fruits. I am rain coming from the dew that causes the grasses to laugh with the joy of life. I invite you now to rise in body or spirit and join in singing our opening hymn, number 38, Morning Has Broken. Morning
Good morning. There we go. Today I'm bringing you our time for all ages is Kachina Brings the Spring. This story was adapted from When the Storm God Rides Texas and other Indian legends. This story was collected in 1936, so you might have to forgive some of the language. I'm not sure yet. A Native American tribe living in the southwestern country was once filled with fear and suffering. It was the beginning of spring, when the green buds should have been peeping from the trees, and the new flowers should have been lifting their fresh, cheery faces from the grass. But something was wrong. Something was wrong this springtime. It was not like spring. There was no rain from the hard blue skies that looked down without tears of pity on the hills and prairies that would not flower and the dry creek beds where the water used to flow. And the weather, it should have been warm, but it was bitter cold. In the day, the sun was far away and had no heat. In the night, the moon and stars were like cold steel in the wide, black sky where no clouds floated. And because of these things, the people suffered in great hunger. There was little food, only parched corn and acorns and shreds of dried buffalo meat. Gone were the wild deer, flown away were the wild turkeys, gone were the buffaloes. The animals and the birds which the people used to eat could not live there without water and food, and they had left the country. And the berries that the tribe needed to eat could not grow in the dry earth. There was no rain to call them up from their sleep underground. The people wandered over the hills in search of food, but they could not find any, and they began to starve. One night, the tribe's medicine man, the wrinkled, wise old Indian who warded off the evil spirits and who knew how to get the good spirits to grant the people's wishes, he came out of his wigwam and he beat loudly on his drum. He was calling the tribe to come listen to him. The people hurried around him and watched him in fear as he pounded on his drum and danced and shouted a song. The starving dogs, when they saw his painted face and his red eyes burning with the light of the campfires, howled and ran away with their tails tucked between their legs, and they hid. They knew there was a strange power working in him. Suddenly the medicine man cried to the people, "Oh, hear me! The Great Spirit has thundered in my ears and told me to speak. He has taken away from us the rain and the flowers and the animals because we have angered him. But he will give us help if we will make him a burnt offering. We must burn something which we love most and gather its ashes and scatter them to the four winds of heaven. Then the winds will carry the ashes to the Great Spirit, and he will be pleased again. Go back to your wigwams and think about what you love most. Tomorrow we will burn it when the sun rises." Now among the people who listened to the medicine man was a little girl. She was holding in her thin arms a wonderful Kachina doll made for her by her grandmother. This Kachina was far more pretty than any of the others in the tribe. It was made of wood carved with a flint knife. Painted on the wooden form were the clothes of a warrior. On its head was a war bonnet of blue feathers, and its eyes were made up of 2 little black beads dyed from berries. The little girl loved her Kachina. She carried it with her when she played and slept with it in her arms at night. When this little girl heard what the Great Spirit wanted, she almost cried, for she felt in her heart that nothing among her people was more loved than her own doll. But she looked up and saw the shadows of pain in the face of her hungry mother. She saw how the thin face of her baby brother was strapped to his mother's back in his cradle. She looked down at her beloved little doll, held it tightly to her breast, and slipped away to her father's wigwam, where she lay for a long time with her face pressed close against her doll. The lodges were still, and the fire in the middle of the camp had died down to red embers when the little girl came out again. In her arms was her doll. She knew she loved her Kachina more than anything else was loved in the tribe, and she had decided to give it up as the Great Spirit had asked, so that her people could be happy again. She cried. She cried a little bit as she laid twigs on the dying embers of the fire. But she blew the fire until it sprang up into a blaze that made the shiny eyes of her doll sparkle, so they seemed to be bright with tears like her own. She hugged the doll and kissed it. Now she laid it in the middle of the flames. Quickly, the flames began to eat the doll. The blue feathers on its head were gone. Tiny shoes turned into smoke. The beady eyes fell off the burning face into the fire, and soon there was nothing left of the doll the little girl had loved. Now she raked out the ashes and sat down to watch them cool. Then she scooped them up and scattered them to the winds. The little girl stooped and patted the ground where the ashes of her doll had lain. And then a wonderful thing happened. Where the ground was bare and hard before, it was now covered with soft leaves that felt warm to her cold little hands. The sharp cold of the night wind was gone, and the smell of spring flowers seemed to fill the air around her. The Great Spirit must have been pleased with the offering of her doll. Happy once more, the little girl hurried to her wigwam and lay down to sleep. In the morning, the child was awakened with the sound of joyous cries outside. She heard drums beating and heard dancing feet. The people were singing. She peeped outside and saw that she had pleased the Great Spirit, because for the first time in many moons, a misty rain was falling, a rain that was good to the thirsty earth. The cold wind was gone too. The warm south wind was gently blowing through the rain and rustling trees that were heavy with new green leaves. She went outside and saw the hills and the prairies that were covered with strange and lovely flowers that the people had never seen before. When she ran to pick one of them, she saw that they were shaped like the little bonnet of feathers that her doll had worn, and blue just like those feathers. At the heart of each small blossom was a speck of red, just like the red of the fire which had burned her doll. And the tips of buds were silver gray like the ashes that were left after it had been burned. When the little girl hurried with one of the new flowers to the people, they knew what had happened. She had given her doll to the Great Spirit, and he had given back to her millions of flowers that were now lying on the hills like a piece of blue sky fallen to earth. And spring had come at last. The people named the new flowers bluebonnets, because they were like the blue bonnet of the little girl's doll. Today, when the bluebonnets appear on the Texas prairies, it is a sign that the Great Spirit has once more returned springtime to the earth. And we will now sing out the children.
This is a very special time in our congregation where each of us has an opportunity to share major events in our lives, our joys, our concerns, and our sorrows, so we can all be uplifted by our UU community. As I read the ones that have given us, the minister will light a candle. Some joys from Courtney Higley. She's halfway through her first class for her master's degree, and she definitely feels special ed is her calling. She also met a man at the store that was deaf. Because she knew ASL, she was able to help him. From Keo, this is a joy and concern. He's quitting a job he's had for a while, and he's excited and joyous for a chance at a new job, but in today's America, who knows if it will work in his favor. A concern from Vic Allen. His immediate concern is the measles outbreak in the U.S. His longer-term concern is the growing anti-science attitude of people in general. Mixture of joy and concern from Miriam. She finally ended an unhappy relationship. She visited her family and is now ready to see what the future holds for her. From Roby Asaro. She wants to express her condolences and heartfelt sympathy to someone many of you know, Amy Smawala, whose husband passed away last week. And a joy from Kat Reese. Got to help her son move his family to their new house, and her granddaughter talks a lot. We light one more candle for all those sorrows, concerns, and joys we hold in our hearts and are not ready to share at this time. Know we lift up our love for you, and we are all in this together.
Well, our reading this morning is from the introduction to the Scivias by Barbara J. Newman. Saint Hildegard, who lived between the years 1098 and 1179, founder and first abbess of the Benedictine community at Bingen, is one of the most fascinating spiritual figures of the 12th century. The bearer of a unique and visionary charism, she was also a prophet in the Old Testament tradition, the first in a long line of prophetically and politically active women, yet at the same time a representative of the German Benedictine aristocracy in its heyday. Proudly aware of belonging to a social and spiritual elite, she was profoundly humble before God, awed by the audacity of her own mission, and by turns diffident and strident about her gifts. Measured in purely external terms, her achievements are staggering. Although she did not begin to write until her 43rd year, Hildegard was the author of a massive trilogy that combines Christian doctrine and ethics with cosmology, a compendious encyclopedia of medicine and natural science, a correspondence comprising several hundred letters to people in every stratum, 2 saints' lives, several occasional writings, and not least a body of exquisite music that includes 70 liturgical songs and the first known morality play. Although other women had written before her, their works had fallen back into silence. We must not underestimate the courage she needed as the first woman, to the best of her knowledge, to take up wax tablets and a stylus in the name of God. Even greater, perhaps, was the daring required to embark on her career as a public preacher of monastic and clerical reform. The mission led her to undertake 4 prolonged preaching tours beginning at the age of 60. She spoke mainly to monastic communities, but on occasion addressed clergy and laity together in the public squares. In the meantime, she continued to guide and administer 2 nunneries she had founded, the first despite strong opposition from her abbot. Its daughter house, located in the Rhineland village of Eibingen, is still thriving today. To her contemporaries, Hildegard was the Sibyl of the Rhine, an oracle they sought out for advice on everything from marital problems and health troubles to the ultimate fate of their souls. Often she gave her advice unsought, most notably to her patron, the Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, whom she rebuked for fiercely for his role in the German papal schism. Her books enjoyed a modest circulation and a widespread notoriety. By later medieval generations, she was remembered primarily as an apocalyptic prophet. Her fiery but enigmatic writings continued to circulate until the Reformation, when she was perversely hailed as a proto-Protestant because she had prophesied the confiscation of ecclesiastical wealth by princes and dissolution of the monasteries. Hildegard unites vision with doctrine, religion with science, charismatic jubilation with prophetic indignation, and the longing for social order with the quest for social justice in ways that continue to challenge and inspire. An offering to support the mission of this church will now be given and gratefully received. It's okay. Well, Marty and I have a lot of paintings, prints, and sculptures in our home, and the art generally falls into two categories: nature-inspired and religious. The nature-inspired art includes paintings, prints, and carvings that depict wild places and a variety of North American wildlife, especially loons, bison, and antlered animals. And the religious art reflects a broad sampling of spirituality, including Neolithic goddesses, a replica pillar from the ancient Göbekli Tepe temple, several Buddhas, a small replica of Michelangelo's Pietà, and a few Christian icons. It is probably just what you would expect in the home of a Unitarian Universalist minister who is very fond of nature and religious history. Two of the icons we have are prints of the works of the Franciscan friar and artist Robert Lentz. Lentz has a unique modern style that I find very appealing. And though he has portrayed many saints and Jesus in his work, as you would expect, he has also created icons of other notable figures of many faiths in whom he sees Christ-like qualities, including Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Jalaluddin Rumi, Mahatma Gandhi, and the assassinated politician and gay rights activist Harvey Milk. The Milk icon isn't too shocking, since Lentz himself is an openly gay Christian friar. The icons we have are his depictions of my two favorite saints from Christian history, Francis of Assisi and Hildegard of Bingen. An image of the Hildegard icon is on your order of service. Most people have heard of Francis of Assisi, and a lot of people who are not even Catholic have garden sculptures and bird feeders made in the image of this famous Italian saint. But not as many people know about Hildegard of Bingen, and I think that is very unfortunate. She was not only a significant religious figure in Christian history, she was an activist who really pushed the envelope and wasn't afraid of getting into what the late Congressman John Lewis called good trouble. So given the present predicament we are facing today, especially with an all-out assault on women's rights underway, I've been asking myself lately, what would Hildegard do? A few years ago, I gave a sermon on Hildegard that focused mostly on her mysticism and theology. And today I want to revisit some of that for background, but I also want to speak more about her activism and how spirituality for her was grounded in her deep trust of nature, and it prepared her for her often extremely difficult work that as she embraced within a truly oppressive political environment, to say the least. We Unitarian Universalists may not revere her as Saint Hildegard the way our Catholic neighbors do, but I think we can learn from her example and translate some of her spiritual teachings for grounding our own justice work, and we could certainly use guidance from any source these days. Even though Hildegard lived over 800 years ago, it is amazing how fresh and timely her teachings can seem to us as modern spiritual speakers. They are spiritually and ecologically very fresh and rich. And though it is dangerous to generalize about the spirituality of Unitarian Universalists, since we are such a diverse bunch of heretics, I think Hildegard's spirituality aligns well with the way Reverend Tom Owen Toll characterized our faith when he said, "We are free-thinking mystics with hands. As bona fide mystics, the substance of our faith points to an ineffable yet undeniable connection with sacrality, both mysterious and sustaining. Unitarian Universalists proclaim two main convictions. Our lives are embraced by a mystery that is gracious and trustworthy, and our human fulfillment lies in surrendering to it." Hildegard's mysticism inspired her worldly pursuits of healing and justice. So I think she would feel right at home in our group of free-thinking mystics with hands. We feel a connection between the sacred mystery of existence and the work of justice and love that we must do as human beings. I'm reminded of an old Shaker saying, "Hands to work, hearts to God." As you heard in the reading, Hildegard of Bingen was an extraordinary woman, a true polymath who excelled in several fields in a time when women had few opportunities for pursuing any intellectual interests. In his icon of her, Lentz has imagined her when she was middle-aged, dressed in traditional Benedictine habit, and holding a wild rose and bowl. It is symbolic of a special blessing practice she had performed when she traveled in a small boat each week between the monasteries on the Rhine. Because she was known as a healer and a miracle worker, people would gather on the riverbanks to ask for help. She used river water to bless them, which she sprinkled on them with a wild rose that she had picked. When my daughter was in elementary school, she attended a Catholic school for a few years, and one year the students were asked to dress like a saint and tell their classmates about their choice. Being a Unitarian Universalist, my daughter felt that Hildegard was appropriately progressive and dressed up like the image in this icon. My daughter had a knack for educating her classmates, so maybe she helped the Catholic Church move just a little bit further and forward on women's rights. With such an amazing person, Lentz could have depicted her writing music or poetry, preparing herbal medicines, or writing volumes of theological propositions. Or perhaps he could have shown her in front of one of the abbeys that she had founded, or even facing off against the layers of authority she fought against in her day. He might also have imagined her experiencing one of her ecstatic visions. According to tradition, she first began to experience these visions around the age of 3, and they became more frequent after she had become an abbess approaching middle-aged. In the year 1141, when she was 43 years old, she began describing her visions to scribes and artists who assisted her over the next 10 years in creating her first major theological work, the Scivias, which is usually translated as Knowing the Ways. It is a remarkable work of over 150,000 words in Latin that combines imagery, poetry, theological thoughts, and 35 illustrations. These illustrations, known as illuminations, are very interesting, and they're unlike any other artwork I have seen from medieval times. Some of them can only be described as cosmic mandalas, similar to those you see in the Tibetan Buddhism, containing highly symbolic ranks of angels and other beings. Other illuminations have a quality that is reminiscent of the paintings by the 20th century artist Marc Chagall. Scholars do not believe Hildegard painted the illuminations herself, but directed the work of more skilled artists. And based on some of the images, modern historians and physicians believe that she likely suffered from migraines that can cause jagged visual disturbances like some of the patterns you see in the art. I can appreciate this from personal experience since I get visual migraines on occasion, fortunately without the blinding headache that many others get. With the limitations of 12th century medieval medicine, Hildegard could only interpret her experiences of the phenomena through the lens of her deeply Christian worldview. So to her, these were nothing less than divine visions. I brought a book with me that contains photos of these fascinating paintings, and I'll have it available during coffee hour if you'd like to see more about them. For Hildegard, the sacred was present all around us in the unfolding creativity of the world. And while her theology and metaphor were firmly rooted in the Western Christian tradition, her emphasis on the creative forces of the Spirit and her vision of creation as the incarnation of God in one interdependent cosmos opens her mystic theology to a broader spiritual audience. She saw that our sacredness was inextricably bound to our relationships with each other and with creation, and that sin and evil were indicative of broken relationships. Creation was original blessing, and it was good and green. It was alive with the creative force that she called viriditas, which is usually translated into English as greening. The world was filled with the light of God, but it was not a light shining down from on high, but shining from within and through. God was not just the creator, but the ongoing creativity in the universe. But Hildegard's mystical visions and theology are only part of her story. She was a composer of beautiful liturgical music, and she is revered by many as the patron saint of music. Many groups that specialize in medieval music have made recordings of her music that you can hear online or purchase. She felt that her music was another way of expressing the creative flow of the Spirit through her into the world. This is how she described it. Underneath all the texts, all the sacred psalms and canticles, these watery varieties of sounds and silences, terrifying, mysterious, whirling, and sometimes gestating and gentle, must somehow be felt in the pulse, ebb, and flow of the music that sings in me. My new song must float like a feather on the breath of God. She also saw the revelation of the divine in the natural world in much the same way that Emerson, Thoreau, and other transcendentalists would 700 years later. She often used natural imagery in her poetry, and she became an expert in the science of her day. She was a healer and published books on herbology and medicine that would be used for centuries afterwards, including 2,000 remedies for various ailments, many of which are being re-examined today. She was especially concerned with illnesses that afflicted women. Her scientific work alone would be enough to include her on any list of noteworthy thinkers of the 12th century, and it was certainly part of her theological formation. And there is even more to her story. Hildegard was a prophet in the tradition of the Hebrew prophets of old, and she was aware of her work in this role. She sometimes compared herself with Ezekiel, who condemned the corruption of religion in her day. In his day, she was driven by her visions and her faith in the power of love to create good in the world. Her cosmos was dominated by justice and harmony, and she felt it was a great sin to allow injustice to flourish. And despite her aristocratic birth, she had an authentic compassion for the poor and dispossessed that is clearly evident throughout her life. She called out injustice and corruption and did not hesitate to provoke the privileged and powerful. Especially in her later years, she castigated monks, abbots, archbishops, popes, and princes, even the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. She was indeed a free-thinking mystic with hands, if ever there was one. And she became a model for generations of politically engaged mystics who followed, including Francis of Assisi and Meister Eckhart. But as with other visionaries and prophets, we must be careful not to project too much of our contemporary values, ethics, and motivations into the real historical Hildegard who lived in 12th century Germany. It is unfortunate, for example, to read of her support for the Second Crusade when we know, that in hindsight, of the horrific violence that it produced and the political repercussions that still echo in the Middle East. It is also difficult when we see in her writing some of the anti-Semitism that was so prevalent in this period. And despite her extraordinary leadership and willingness to confront the patriarchal church authority, she seemed to accept the subordinate status of women when it came to the priesthood. I can imagine that her sense of equality would have allowed Hildegard to consider the possibility of female priesthood, but in her day, pushing social change too far, too fast, could often end with one smoldering at the stake. It is worth mentioning that the Roman Catholic Church still does not allow women in the priesthood. Even as we venerate her and perhaps find profound spiritual significance in her teachings, we must allow for her real humanity within the context of her times. But I think this too aligns with her sense of union of the sacred and the ordinary. She would remind us that as imperfect participants in creation, we are not always aligned with the good. But of course, that does not stop us from creating. Hildegard would tell us to look within for the divine light that is in all of us, no matter how sinful we may be, and come around to the good. She would tell us that what is sacred is still there. The sacred is there in the serendipitous creativity of the world, and especially in the springtime as the world becomes verdant and green and moist. It moves in the flow of the waters of the earth, the sap in the trees, and in the blood and marrow of our bones. The sacred is there in the birth of every child, in the food pantries and homeless shelters, and in the streets of Selma, Washington, and Gaza. The fiery life of divine essence permeates all things in all places. God is sacred mystery. God is the Tao. It is the holy light that moves in our hands and feet as we do the incarnate work of justice. Her spirituality was broad and inclusive and grounded in interdependence. In the 150 years following her death, there were 3 efforts to formally canonize Hildegard, but none was successful. Nevertheless, she was considered to be a saint by popular acclaim. And by the 15th century, she was included in the official martyrologies of the saints, with the feast day of September 17th. Then at long last, on May 10th, 2012, Pope Benedict XVI officially declared Hildegard to be a doctor of the Church. It is an elite honor that recognizes those individuals who contributed significantly to the formation of Christian doctrine. It only took 833 years, but that designation effectively recognized Hildegard as a saint in the Roman Catholic Church. She is only the 4th woman to receive the Doctor of the Church honor, the others being Catherine of Siena, Teresa of Avila, and Thérèse of Lisieux, illustrious company to say the least. We may not officially recognize saints in our Unitarian Universalist tradition, but Hildegard remains part of our heritage, and I am more than happy to claim her. Springtime often makes me think about Hildegard, especially around International Women's Day, which is celebrated globally on March 8th. The theme this year was Accelerate Action, and as the promotional materials described, the emphasis was on the importance of taking swift and decisive steps to achieve gender equality, increasing momentum and urgency in addressing the systemic barriers and biases that women face, both in personal and professional spheres. I think if Hildegard were alive today, she would definitely have something to say about this. And with all the horrific government policies at the federal, state, and local levels that we are seeing, I have no doubt she would have taken to the streets many times already. She would have found oceans of resolve in the greening power of the earth and the sacredness that permeates the cosmos. And this would sustain her activism during the difficult challenges that we face. I think she embodied the sentiment that the environmentalist Rachel Carson expressed when she wrote, "Those who contemplate the beauty of the earth find reserves of strength that will endure as long as life lasts." Hildegard really began her work in earnest in her 40s, and she was still a firebrand in her 80s. So she would tell us to keep going as long as you can. Although spring has officially arrived and the days are getting longer with the promise of greenness returning to the earth, lately it seems like a dark cloud is trying to obscure anything hopeful or life-affirming. But maybe such times are when we need to ask, what would Hildegard do? Maybe we should even make some of those rubber wristbands emblazoned with WWHD to remind us. How would she reach deep into the greening power of the earth to find the resilience and fortitude to keep up the good trouble in such times? She would certainly find strength in her convictions about the sacredness that flows out of and through everything around us, that fiery life of divine essence. Or maybe she would find reassurance in her music. Given her history, it is impossible for me to imagine her giving up hope and conceding defeat. Instead, I am reminded of the feminist slogan from 2017 that you may recall, "Nevertheless, she persisted." That phrase was first spoken in derogatory comments made by Mitch McConnell about Senator Elizabeth Warren. It was intended as criticism of her for being adamant about her right to speak against the nomination of Jeff Sessions for Attorney General. But instead, it turned into a badge of honor. If you read about Hildegard's battles with the church patriarchy over a host of issues, you can appreciate her relentless persistence that usually paid off. Hildegard would tell us to persist in the fight for our values no matter how difficult the struggle becomes, no matter how insurmountable the odds may seem, no matter how many setbacks we encounter. She was a prodigious letter writer, to people in authority. So she would tell us to contact every politician that we can and never sit idly by. She would also probably remind us that if she could win concessions from the powerful Roman Catholic Church as a woman in the 12th century, we should be able to overcome just about anything. It may not be easy, but why should we expect it to be? We could learn a lot from this wonderful, imperfect, remarkable woman, though few of us could ever hope to accomplish as much as she did in a single lifetime. Her green theology is worthy of exploration in our search for truth and meaning, no matter what spiritual path we are on. And in my opinion, it is centuries ahead of her time. She can still reach across the ages to inspire us with her music, which has a hauntingly beautiful quality that can be appreciated even if you don't understand the Latin lyrics. In fact, I often listen to her music softly in the background as I am reading or writing. She was truly a fascinating person. So when you feel despair at the world rising within you, take a deep breath and ask yourself, what would Hildegard do? You might just feel a surge of viriditas well up and give you the clarity and resolve to carry on. I invite you to rise in body or spirit once again and join in singing our closing hymn, number 27, I Am That Great and Fiery Force, with words by Hildegard of Bingen. Our closing words are the poem, O Strength of Wisdom, by Hildegard of Bingen. O strength of wisdom, who circling circled, enclosing all in one life-giving path. 3 wings you have, one soars to the heights, one distills its essence upon the earth, and the third is everywhere. Praise to you, as is fitting, O wisdom.
We will now extinguish our chalice with the following words from Elizabeth Sell Jones. If you wish, join me in reciting them. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And now our postlude, played by June Cannon.
you.